Alright, amazing hackers, welcome to the core network concept for ethical hackers. Let's start with an introduction to some networking concepts first. So, let's talk about the overview in this PowerPoint, at least at the overview of the network architecture. We're also going to talk about the OSI and some of the terms you need to understand before we can get started. Before we will give you some examples of a network attack on switches with the types of networks and networks devices followed by that. And then, of course, as a last topic, we will take on a quiz for maximum knowledge retention. So here's a bit of an overview of a network architecture. We can see that there are quite a few components that we have to take into account. Let's first talk about the intranet. The intranet is the internal network of the company. This is the network that the company is going to put things like work computers into. Here you will have, for example, work computers who need to do file exchange with each other without touching the internet and being properly protected by a firewall. So in that case, you can use your intranet. You've also probably heard of the intranet .yourcompanyname.com. Some companies just literally name their intranet. And with that, they don't mean their whole internal network. They mean only a website available from the internal network. The intra-network, it's a bit of a misleading term, which is why I am talking about it here. But that intranet, the website that your company posts their internal news on, that is a different intranet than we are talking about right here. Our intranet goes about computers in the internal network of the company. It can also be servers, of course. When we talk about the DMZ, which is the demilitarized zone, this is a separate area of the network which has much less strict security rules. It's a publicly accessible server space where you will have servers like web servers or email servers, for example, and they are placed on a separate and isolated network segment. When we talk about the extranet, we talk about everything that is external to a specific network. So in this case, a private network provided to trusted third parties. That is what we know under extranet. When we talk about the OSI, some of you guys have seen this before, and gals, of course, but for those of you who haven't, we have 7 layers in total. We have the data unit, and then we have the layer as well. The data unit is what type of data is representing these layers. For example, on the physical layers where you have ones and zeros, that is going to be your bits. Those ones and zeros, I mean, of course, on a physical level, so that's literally a switch going on and off or an electrical signal coming through or not. When we go one layer higher, we talk about the data link layer. And here, if you talk about the data link, that is going to consist of several bits consisting together a frame. Multiple frames then on their term make up packets on layer 3, which is the network model. So remember, you have your bits on the lowest level, bits comprised to make a frame comprised to make packets, and we're talking about the physical level up to the data link up to the network, and then those packets, they combine into segments. That is your transport layer. When we go to, 3 layers above that, I should say, we have layer 5, 6, and 7, which are the session, presentation, and application layers. These layers are data related, so they're no longer related to bits, frames, packets, segments. These are what we call data. A little bit of an example of an attack that I'm going to introduce to you is a layer 2 attack, in this case of MAC flooding. MAC flooding is a layer 2 network attack that exploits the way switches learn and forward MAC addresses by flooding the switch with a large number of fake MAC addresses. This is going to exhaust your switch's MAC address table and causing it to enter into a fail open mode like a hub. This is going to potentially enable the attacker to intercept and eavesdrop on network traffic. What does that look like? Here's a simple MAC table on a sample switch that we have set up. Here you can see that we have a destination address, the address type, the VLAN that's hosted on, which we'll get back to later as well, and a destination port. So you have your destination address linked to a destination port. That is your MAC table on a switch. If we execute the following command, this is using the macOF tool, it's going to generate thousands of macs and send them out. As you can see, macof-i and then on eve0, for example, it will start flooding that MAC table with useless addresses, and those are going to be in the thousands. And that is, of course, not a situation you want to be in. When we talk about network devices, what I would like you to remember is the difference between a router, a level 2 and a level 3 switch, and a firewall. A router is a network device that's going to forward data packets, and that's why those OSI model layers come in handy. It's going to forward data packets between computer networks, and this is typically going to be used to connect devices across different IP networks. So this is two different networks talking to each other through a router. A switch, on the other hand, you have your level 2 and level 3, of course, but this is going to operate at the data link layer or layer 2, and it's going to provide network connectivity by forwarding frames between connected devices based on their MAC addresses. The layer 3 switch, on the other hand, is a network switch that combines the functionality of a traditional layer 2 switch with routing functionality. So a switch, you can see, sort of like a dumb little switch. It's going to switch a network. Switch is going to operate at the data layer, and it's going to provide network connectivity by forwarding frames between connected devices based on their MAC address. So you have different devices that are connected. It's going to see, oh, this packet needs to go to this MAC address. That is what your layer 2 switch is going to do. Whereas your router, in this case, is going to be used for connecting devices across different IP networks. Your level 3 switch is that level 2 switch combined with the routing functionality. So it's going to enable it to route traffic between subnets at high speeds. A firewall, you need to remember, because it's a network security device that's going to monitor and filter incoming and outgoing network traffic based on predefined security rules. This is going to either allow or block traffic based on that rule set, and we have different types of firewalls as well, but we'll get more into that into the firewall section specifically. Then we also have UTM devices. These are unified threat management devices, and it's a comprehensive network security solution that's going to combine multiple security technologies such as firewalls, antivirus, intrusion detection and prevention, or IDS and IPS systems, and content filtering. And it's going to combine all of that functionality into a single device or software platform. IPS we've already talked about before. This is your intrusion prevention system, a network security device or software that monitors network traffic for signs of malicious activity or known attack patterns, and it's going to take proactive measures. So this is going to prevent the intrusion. The IDS is going to detect your intrusion. It's not going to take preventative measures. So this is a network security device or software that monitors network traffic for signs of suspicious activity or known attack patterns, and it's going to generate alerts. It's not going to take preventative measures once again. An access point is a networking hardware device that allows Wi-Fi enabled devices to connect to a wired network, typically used in wireless local area networks, WLANs also called. This is going to provide wireless connectivity to devices within the network covered area. How do you need to see this at home? At home, you probably have a modem that's up to a router. That router, it might have some switching going on because it might only have two ports available and you want to plug in 15 devices. Well, then you need a switch, of course, and you have access points such as your wireless router. Alright, time for a quiz. What kind of device am I showing here? Now, if you've guessed that this is a switch, you're correct. How about this one? This is an all-in-one device that you probably have at home, a router, switch, and an access point. So now that we've introduced you to the start of core networking concepts, we need to talk about TCP, IP, and UDP. What are these? Let's talk about what the TCP IP protocol suite entails, the differences between TCP and UDP, some of the other basic protocols, and how to analyze your network traffic with Wireshark through Telnet and SSH. If we look at TCP versus UDP, we can see that TCP is a transmission control protocol and UDP stands for user diagram protocol. TCP is connection oriented, meaning that a handshake first has to be made before packets can be sent back and forth, whereas UDP is connectionless. TCP is a reliable data transmission way and ensures that delivery is possible because of that handshake at the start, where UDP is an unreliable data transmission mechanism, delivering no guarantees of delivery. And this is of course different. For some example, let's talk about streaming. If you're streaming, then you won't notice if a frame here or there drops, or if you're watching a YouTube video, even a dropped frame here or there is not that important. That is where UDP comes in. It does not provide error checking or retransmission of lost packets where TCP does. TCP is slower, but it's more secure. UDP is faster but less secure, but keep note that in a port scan, UDP will take longer to detect because it doesn't make that initial handshake, which is what a lot of port scanners will use to test TCP. In UDP, they have to send a packet and wait. This is of course faster when it comes to data transmission, in a sense that we don't have to wait, see if the packets actually arrived properly, retransmit lost packets, etc. But it comes at the cost of security. TCP is going to be used for applications that require data integrity and accuracy, such as browsing, email, and file transfer, whereas UDP will be used for applications that require speed and efficiency. For example, videos, online gaming, and VoIP. TCP in order to TCP is based on in-order data delivery, meaning the packets arrive in the same order they were sent. UDP, on the other hand, has no guarantee of in-order data delivery, meaning that packets can arrive out of sync as well a little bit. Packet 20 can come first, and then instead of packet 21 or 22, it might send packet number 19. TCP uses flow control to avoid overwhelming the receiver, where UDP does not have flow control. The packets can be sent without regard of the receiver's ability to process them. TCP has that three-way handshake that we already spoke about to establish a connection, and a four-way handshake to terminate a connection. Whereas UDP, no handshake is required. Packets can be sent immediately. Some of those basic protocols include the DNS, for example, or the domain name system. This is a protocol that's used for translating human-readable domains, such as the thexssrat.com, into IP addresses. It operates at the application layer 7, DHCP is the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and if you've ever plugged or connected to a network, you might have noticed that you've been assigned an IP address. That IP address comes from this protocol unless they give you a set IP address per MAC address of your computer, because those MAC addresses, once again, they are bound to a certain device or even a network card. This also means that when you have dynamic assignment of IP addresses, the protocol for those dynamic assignments is going to be DHCP, meaning that once again, if you plug your computer into your network at home, chances are more than likely that a DHCP server is running, which is going to ingest your MAC, see if you already have an IP address, and if you don't, assign one to you. This also operates at the application layer 7. Then we also have ARP, or Address Resolution Protocol. This is a protocol used for mapping a network address, such as an IP address, for example, to a physical address, such as a MAC address. ICMP, or Internet Control Messaging Protocol, is a protocol used for sending error messages and operational information about network conditions. This operates at the network layer. When we speak about Telnet, this is a protocol used for remotely terminal access and control, and it operates at the application layer or layer 7. SSH, or Secure Shell, is used to connect to do a server remotely, securely as well, and control it. And this is what you use if you want to send commands remotely to your server. SNMP, or Simple Network Management Protocol, is a protocol used for managing and monitoring network devices. This is going to operate at the application layer 7. And then we have SMTP, or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. This is a protocol used for sending and receiving email messages. It's going to operate at the application layer 7 once again. So why is Telnet not secure? In this example, we are going to use a very popular tool called Wireshark, and this is going to allow us to analyze the packets and capture them from a Telnet session. So as you can see in the bar at the top here, we have set a filter for Telnet, and we are looking at the data that is being transmitted as it comes along over the network. We can literally see the exact data being transmitted, which of course is a problem. In other words, it's going to transmit it in plain text. If you give an instruction to a server, that transaction is going to be transmitted in plain text. This is not good, of course. We can use SSH, which is going to help us there, but this should give you an example of why Telnet is not the most secure way to send commands to your server. Alright, onwards to networking devices, because I think it's very important that you understand what you're up against, what kind of network device you're fighting, and which ones are out there. Now we're going to keep it very simple in this example, but I want you to know that there are much more out there, and I would like you to go looking for yourself a little bit as well. What we do want to highlight here is the difference between switches, routers, gateways, and even firewalls, aka gateways. These are the types of networking devices that we're going to get into, and also how to protect yourself against brute forcing, because I'm sure that a lot of you have heard about brute forcing, but how do you protect against it? As for routers, routers are basically devices that connect computer networks, so network A and network B, and they direct traffic between them. They're using routing tables to determine the most efficient path for data to travel. Why is it important? Because I just gave you the example of network A, network B. That's just two networks interconnected. But if you have 100 networks, what's the quickest hop? Because you don't want to make 100 network hops to reach your destination. If you can do it in one, that will add a lot of latency. There are basically two types of routing protocols, the static ones and the dynamic ones. We're going to look at the table below as well, a little bit more in detail. But a static routing table involves manual configuration. That's what you need to know. Dynamic routing protocols are going to allow routers to adapt to changing networks. Let's analyze a one-liner from that routing table, shall we? First of all, that S that you see at the very front, it indicates that this is a static line, a static route. And it indicates that it's going to go to the network, this 192.168.8.0, going to go to the route of 10.10.10.253. As for switches, switches are networking devices that forward data between connected devices based on their MAC addresses. When a device sends data, the switch reads the source MAC address and stores it in its MAC address table. So we had routers, which were routers between different networks, and switches are switches that are network devices between different connected devices based on MAC addresses. When a device sends data, that switch is going to read that source MAC address and store it in its MAC address table. Important to remember that. The switch then is going to check the destination MAC address in its table and forward the data out of the appropriate port. Important protocols here to remember are spanning tree protocol. This is used to prevent loops in the network by disabling redundant links. Now, a little bit of a funny story. When I was in high school, STP was not enabled. What did that enable us to do? We took a network cable, we stuck it in port 1. We took the other end of that same network cable, we stuck it in port 2. And in a matter of minutes, you had a complete packet storm going on because there was a MAC broadcast and it kept repeating itself in an ever-growing infinite loop. That is why spanning tree protocol needs to be enabled, my friends, because we would disable the entire network of the entire school if we didn't feel like it for that day. It was so funny seeing them look at all of the different ports in the entire school to see which ones were the cause. VLANs are for the network segmentation of a single physical network into multiple logical networks. So if I have one network, 192.168.0.0/24, for example, that is one big network, but I can also segment that into VLANs. This is going to enable better network management and security, as we can put computers into certain VLANs and apply network rules and gateway rules based on those VLANs. Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP, is used by devices to map IP addresses to those MAC addresses on a network. A man-in-the-middle attack on the ARP is going to involve intercepting and altering ARP messages to associate the attacker's MAC address with the IP address of another device. So what the attacker is going to do is intercept that ARP package, and he's going to change the MAC address with his MAC address with the one in the package. This is going to allow the attacker to intercept and manipulate the data being sent between the two devices. And to prevent these ARP attacks, network admins can use multiple techniques, such as, for example, ARP spoof detection and port security. Firewalls, aka gateways, are used to protect networks by controlling the flow of network traffic. They work based on access control lists, and they're used to specify which traffic is allowed or denied, I should say, based on IP address, port number, and protocols. So if you think about that very carefully, that is blacklist-based filtering. Yes, everything is allowed by default, and we're going to remove certain things, or we're going to deny traffic by default, for example, and only open certain network routes of traffic. These are two different ways of filtering. Not super important, but for you who want to look into that more, look into whitelist-based and blacklist-based filtering. We have the allow and the deny based on the IP addresses here, port numbers, and protocols. Firewalls can also perform layer 7 inspection to analyze application level traffic and block unauthorized access. For example, web application firewalls or API firewalls. This is going to help prevent cyber attacks and unauthorized access to sensitive data. A brute force login password attack is a type of attack that is going to attempt to guess a user's login credentials by trying different combinations of username and password. A variation of that, for example, is password stuffing, where they take a known username and password combination leaked from a different hack and they try it on different accounts because people are force of habit, that's what they call it. We act on that very, very strongly, and we tend to have the same username and password for everything. Cyber criminals will happily take advantage of that, and they will brute force a system until matches are found. This attack is going to be preventable by using strong passwords, limiting login attempts, using unique passwords everywhere, and implementing multi-factor authentication. To limit login attempts on a Cisco device, you can use the command login block 4 followed by the number of seconds to block further login attempts after a specific number of failed login attempts. You might also have heard from gradual backoff or gradual blocking mechanisms, which is like the first time that you enter the password incorrect for 3 times, you get 60-second logouts, and after that you get 120, you get 180, you get 240. You see where this is going. So every time the time increases. For example, login block for 60 attempts, 3 within 120. Will block for 60 seconds after 3 failed login attempts within 120 seconds. So if the user is going to make 2 failed login attempts and then 121 seconds later another one, it will not block them. It's also going to generate a log message like you see below. Still time left for watching failures in 92 seconds. So 92 seconds is when the user entered 3 incorrect passwords. And the source IP is there with the local port and the reason. Alright, my friends, on to the next topic. Alright, on to the 4th lesson, my friends, 4 core networking concepts. Let's talk about IP addressing. This is a concept that I personally always struggle with. So if you're struggling the first time through, don't worry too much about it. Just go through it a couple of times and it will come. Understanding IP addressing and subnetting is a big one, and that will in that I mean, of course, are the IPv4 and IPv6 addresses with the DHCP service and DNS. Those are things you need to know about. IPv4 is the 4th edition of the Internet Protocol. This is going to use a 30-bit address space. So this 30 bits is going to allow for 4.3 billion unique addresses. That is 4.3 billion. If you think that every single device that's connected to the internet has an IP, that is not a whole lot. And while we have internal networks in our homes to alleviate this a little bit, and there are of course routers in there to connect the internet, the network for the internet, to our internal network. Remember from previous lessons, routers. But still, 4.3 billion unique addresses isn't a whole lot. That is why they have IPv6, I mean, of course. IPv6 is the next follow-up, so not IPv5 as you might imagine, but IPv6. And it's going to use the 128-bit addressing space, which will allow for almost limitless number of unique addresses. IPv4 is still widely used, but the transition to IPv6 is necessary because there are an ever-increasing amount of internet devices coming on and on to the networks, and we need to all give them proper addressing. This, what you see on screen, is a IPv4 address, and here we have the first 3 groups, so 192, 168, and 1. These are reserved for our network. And then we have a host on that network with a subnet mask. That subnet mask is /24. We'll get more into that a little bit later. The network address here would be 192.168.1.0, whereas the broadcast address always is going to be, in this case, since it's a 24 IP address, it's going to go to 192.168.7.255. This is a C class address. We also have A and B classes. If you want to know more about it, I've put a link in the PowerPoint as well. Feel free to look that up. Broadcast storms, these are things that we talked about before as well. Remember when we talked about spanning tree protocol? These occur when there's a continuous loop of broadcast messages in a network, leading to an excessive amount of traffic that can cause the network to become unusable. A broadcast storm can be unintentional, such as when there's a misconfiguration in the network, or it can be intentionally caused by malicious attacker as a form of denial of service attack. To prevent or mitigate broadcast storms, it is important to implement proper network design, configure network devices correctly, and network traffic for abnormal behavior. DNS, when we talk about that, that is the domain name service. It translates into IP addresses. For example, if you have google.com, you need to have an IP address which you're actually going to. This is an A record in DNS, and it's going to, if you do a ping, for example, to google.com, it's going to translate that to its respective IP address. If we can ping that and then we can see what that is, that lookup is an A record lookup. We can also have A records, 4 times A, that's the same as an A record, but for IPv6. CNAME records, or canonical name records, point to a domain, point from a domain to another domain, is what we should call it. So for example, google.com can go to, I don't know, let's say something silly, google.be, for example. MX records direct email to different servers. So these are MX mail exchange. PTR records are the opposite of A records in this case, where A records point to a specific IP address. This is going to be an IP address pointing to a domain name, so the reverse basically. Text records are also a possibility TXT, and they're used for the verification and data analysis. They provide information to external sources. We talked about DHCP a little bit as well. DHCP is going to discover if there's, in this case, for example, we have our client PC. It's going to discover if there's a DHCP server running on the network. And then it's going to say, hey, DHCP, I'm here and I need an IP address. DHCP is going to reserve that IP address to that MAC address for a little period. And that period can differ. Some of us might have a home IP address. You can all look at what's my IP.com, I believe. And if you go to that website, it'll give you your home IP. That almost never changes, but usually that router that you have facing the internet has also been given an IP address by a DHCP server. And printer, for example, is sometimes the opposite. You don't want your printer to change IP addresses every 5 minutes, because then you're going to have to reinstall your drivers every 5 minutes. So you're going to give that a static IP address in the DHCP server. You're going to say in the DHCP server, if this MAC address comes knocking, you give it this IP address. Then the client PC answers, yeah, I'll take it, and the DHCP sends a DHCP ACK. So these package, DHCP discover, DHCP offer, a DHCP request, and DHCP ACK are the packages being sent, and you can see them with Wireshark as well. DNS amplification attacks in this instance are a type of distributed denial of service attacks that exploit vulnerabilities in DNS servers to flood a target system with an overwhelming amount of traffic. DHCP exhaustion attacks, on the other hand, overwhelm DHCP servers by requesting too many IP addresses. This causes the server to become unresponsive. Both attacks can disrupt network communications and cause downtime. This makes it important to implement proper security measures and regularly update software to mitigate the risks of these attacks. Onwards to lesson number 5. Let's talk about some network service, shall we? First of all, SNMP, the good and the bad. What is it? What is wrong with it? And how can we use it for good? Then we also have monitoring the network, because of course a lot of network traffic is going back and forth, but how do we see exactly what's going on? And we also have anomaly detection, because once we have that monitor going on, how do we see when something is going wrong? That's a good question, isn't it? First of all, SNMP are the Simple Network Management Protocol. This is a protocol that's very widely used. It's used for managing and monitoring network devices, such as, for example, a router, a switch, a server. This is going to allow your admins to collect data and configure devices remotely. So this protocol has several versions. Currently, we are at SNMP version 3. It is the most secure and widely used version today. Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in SNMP, of course, because if you can manage and monitor service, you can probably, and of course switches, routers, it's really easy to manage them in a way that is advantageous for opposers. For example, default or weak community strings, passwords aka, being used for authentication or by exploiting SNMP traps are what they are known as. They can also use SNMP information gathering or as a stepping stone for further attacks on the network, because as you might imagine, all of that monitoring brings in quite a bit of information that is very useful to ethical hackers and not so ethical hackers alike. To defend against SNMP attacks, administrators should use a strong authentication and encryption, monitor network activity for signs of exploitation, and restrict access to SNMP services using ACLs or access control lists. An example of creating one of these SNMPs using an ACL or access control list: first you're going to create one for allowing one host and denying everything else. Access list 99 permit a host 10.10.10.189, and access list 99 deny any. So first line is going to actually allow that single host, and second line is going to allow and deny anything else. If you want to apply that, we simply write SNMP server space community space password space RO space 99 for referencing that list, access list 99, and it should be applied on the SNMP servers. So that is the management part, but also monitoring the network is important, because monitoring systems can be exploited through various techniques, such as exploiting vulnerabilities in the monitoring software itself, leveraging weak or default credentials, and exploiting open ports used by monitoring protocols such as SNMP. Above all else, if monitoring traffic is sent back and forth, an attacker might be able to gain some useful information from that. Port scanners can be used to identify these open ports and vulnerable services, while brute forcing attacks can be used to crack weak or default credentials. Attackers can also use SNMP to gain access to sensitive information on the network or to execute malicious commands on the network itself. It's important to secure these monitoring systems through best practices such as strong authentication and access controls. An example of this you can see here. This is a dashboard of PRTG, a popular monitoring system, and this system is based on SNMP. So it'll send out SNMP packets to see what the status of the server is for monitoring purposes. Anomaly detection is implemented in monitoring systems, and it can help protect our network by identifying and alerting us to potential security threats in real time. Anomaly detection is going to take a baseline reading of what your normal traffic looks like on a network, and then the moment it sees anything suspicious or out of line that would normally not be sent, it's going to at least alert you and potentially even take action depending on the system you have in place. Many systems use machine learning algorithms and statistical analysis to establish a baseline of normal network behavior and identify any deviations from it. These machine learning and AI systems will get more evolved as the future comes closer, so that can be a bigger problem, or at least it can be a bigger problem because you can also use this technology of machine learning, of AI. You can have your own anomaly detection if you know what a network looks like. So an example of an attack here could be an attacker actually monitoring the network for normal network traffic, then seeing if their traffic gets detected by the anomaly detection themselves, because they have trained it on your network. And then if it's not detected, they can launch their attack undetected even. So that's a big attack on anomaly detection itself. Many threats in this world, of course. All we can do is educate ourselves. This could be an indicator of security threats such as malware, network intrusions, or unauthorized access on your systems, servers, routers, or switches. By detecting and responding to these threats quickly, we can minimize the potential impact on our network and prevent data breaches or other security incidents. One thing I would like to mention as well, and I think it's a little bit late that we mentioned this, but I still think it should be said that a server, a switch, etc., these are all just computers as well in essence. They have an operating system, they have firmware on which they operate. So yes, they can be hacked just like a server. That is why we intermingle them very often. They are just on different layers of the OSI model. Alright, amazing hackers, let's move on to LAN and WAN technologies. What are we talking about here? We are talking about VLANs, just a small part of it of course, because we're also going to talk about Ethernet and Wi-Fi, and last of all, attacking WPA. So VLANs, what are we talking about here? Sometimes it's important to switch one network into different networks to distribute one network into VLANs. So you have a LAN network and you can distribute that in a virtual LAN network, or multiple virtual LAN networks, I should say. It's a method of labeling Ethernet frames with a VLAN identifier to allow network switches to identify and separate traffic belonging to different virtual LANs or VLANs. Trunks are network links in this case that can carry multiple VLANs between switches, and they use VLAN tagging to distinguish and prioritize your VLAN traffic. If we talk about access ports, what you need to know about them is that they are switch ports configured to connect end devices such as computers, printers, or anything else that is more of a end user, a consumer device. This is going to be tied to a specific LAN then, and they do not support VLAN tagging. Now, why is that important, you might be asking yourself? Configuring a port as an access port for an end device is important for security reasons. Access ports, they restrict the traffic that can flow through the port to a single VLAN, which helps prevent unauthorized access to sensitive network resources. If a port is not configured as an access port, an attacker could potentially gain access to other VLANs and resources on the network by sending tag frames with different VLAN ID. By configuring a port as an access port, the switch will remove any VLAN tags from incoming frames, and this ensures that only traffic from the configured VLAN is allowed to pass through. If we talk about wireless networks are plenty. There are many different technologies and standards. You've probably heard these before. 802.11a, B, and later on we had G introduced in 2019, in 2003 I should say. In 2009 we have the N version introduced, which upped the max speed all the way up to 600 megabytes per second with a distance of 70 meters indoors or 250 meters outdoors, operating on the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz frequency. If we talk about AC, that is what was introduced in 2013, allowing for up to 7 gigabytes per second with the same range, operating on a 5 gigahertz network. And then we have a X, or Wi-Fi 6 is it's also called, was introduced in 2019, doubling the speed up to 14 gigabytes per second, and it's double the range of AC. It also operates on the 5 gigahertz frequency, and these wireless networks are also vulnerable to various types of attacks, of course, such as eavesdropping, interception, unauthorized access. This is because these signals are broadcast over the air. Anybody can pick up a wireless signal, and they can intercept that with the right tools and with the right knowledge. They can even decode it, and especially if these packets aren't sent super securely. Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in this wireless protocol or compromise weak security measures, such as weak passwords or unsecured access points, to gain access to the network or steal sensitive information. The big advantage that you had with a cable was that yes, you had to plug that cable in and you were in the network, so much less of a password required, but with good MAC filtering that wasn't really a problem. The problem arises when you have wireless that broadcasts everywhere and everybody can pick that up with these physical ports. At least you know this is the entry point. So if you see somebody messing with your physical port, that's much more suspicious than if you see them sitting in a corner sipping their coffee. They're just sitting in a corner after all, but they might be trying to get access to your Wi-Fi. How does that work attacking WPA, you might be wondering, and WEP especially. WEP is very easy to crack, so we won't focus on that. Let's talk about WPA, because when I was in college, WEP was already super easy to crack. WPA as well, WPA2. So if your wireless card is active, you can use the command airmon.ng to check if that is. You can scan the area with arrow dump-ng WLAN 0. Take note of the BSS ID and the channel, for example AAAA and channel 1. Then we can create a captured file with arrow dump-ng-c and then the 1-w your capture, that is the name of our capture of course, dash BSSID, and then the SSID that we had over WLAN 0 or whichever your active network card is at that moment. Crack it with aircrackng-w and then /yourcapture.cap. That looks something like this, and here you can see which passphrases it is attempting with the master keys, the transient keys, and the AOPOL HMAC. You can see that the time left in this case would have been 51 minutes and 55 seconds, and of course the more powerful your computer is, the faster this will go. Alright, so lesson 7, let's continue with firewalls. Let's talk about firewall technology, how it works, and then talk about the types of firewalls before we go into firewall configuration and management, but also show you some examples. So first of all, let's understand what a firewall really does. Firewalls are security devices. They monitor and filter network traffic based on predefined rules. They're going to protect your networks by blocking unauthorized access and preventing malicious traffic. And that is both an incoming and outgoing traffic. Firewalls can be attacked through techniques such as firewall evasion, exploiting vulnerabilities, and denial of service attacks. And these attacks can compromise the effectiveness of firewalls and render them ineffective in protecting the network. A simple example is a firewall overload attack, where you're going to try to overload the firewall, and of course these systems don't want every single piece of traffic to die just because their firewall is overloaded for a moment. So what do? They set up bypasses which say If the firewall is overloaded, just bypass the traffic. So that can be a devastating attack, as you can imagine. Regular updates and configurations are crucial to stay ahead of these attacks and maintain firewall effectiveness. So what types do we have? We have the stateful type and the stateless type. The name says it all, stateful. It remembers the state of the previous packages and it inspects the following traffic based on that, or at least it takes it into account, whereas a stateless firewall is only going to filter traffic based on predefined rules and treat each packet individually. Layer 7 firewalls are application layer firewalls, and most of you have probably heard about the term WAF before, a web application firewall, but these are also available on API level, for example, and they operate on layer 7 of the OSI model. Unlike traditional firewalls, which only filter traffic based on your IP address and port, Layer 7 firewalls can actually inspect and control traffic based on the application and the context of that data. Remember, API specific, they're going to look at API specific traffic, inspect it and control it based on API contexts. How about web? Well, that's a different context of data and it's going to be determined by your web application firewall, so it's going to inspect those web packets. It's all a little bit different, but on layer 7 we add that application layer to it. This is going to allow the firewalls to provide more granular and sophisticated security measures such as deep packet inspection, content filtering and threat prevention. If we talk about SSL inspection, here's an example of a Zexal USG. And here we can see encrypted traffic with malware question mark. The solution in this case is for the secure socket layer or SSL encryption. It is growing in the worldwide scene and it is some of the more popular examples of websites contain Dropbox, Gmail, and they're offering users the ability to have their entire sessions encrypted. Unfortunately, though, attackers are increasingly turning to encryption to evade detection, which might bring some attacks, intrusions, or malware. Enterprises face challenges as how to inspect incoming and outgoing traffic for such threats under SSL encryption. So you can already guess it. Yes, indeed, you're totally right. The have encryption based, like you can even think about just uploading something on Google Drive that is end-to-end encrypted, or in Gmail I should say, that's end-to-end encrypted. Well, then Gmail can't really inspect that, can it? Well, there is a solution for it, thankfully. Zexal Next Generation USG series, they feature SSL inspection, and it does not only provide comprehensive security but also deeper policy enforcement. This is going to enable USG's application intelligence, content filtering and antivirus to inspect traffics in SSL encrypted connections and block threats that usually go unseen. But if you're interested, there's a link in the PowerPoint as well. Just go and have a read about the article. All you need to know or remember about this is that when you encrypt traffic through SSL, it's going to be a lot harder to inspect, of course, so we need custom solutions. Here is an overview of how to manage one of these firewalls, for example. And in this case, we are choosing to manage either on-premise or Nebula mode. On-premise mode is you have it in your own range, it's in your own network, you have it on your own premise basically, and you're going to manage your Zexal device directly, either using the browser-based web configurator or CLI. You can also choose Nebula mode, and that's going to manage your Zexal device remotely using the Nebula Control Center or NCC. This is the mode if you want to go through the cloud. Here's an example of a denial of service attack being stopped by a firewall. On the left, you can see that a lot of pings are going to, or at least trying to go through, especially if we add that --flood mode flag and that last command there, hping3-l, and then the IP address --flood. That's going to try and enter flood mode. But as you can see, our intrusion prevention or IPS system picks that up. SYN flood detected, no problem. We also have an example here of a web interface where we can say, okay, this is content filtering, this is deep content inspection, and this is different. This is your level 7 firewall because it's going to actually inspect on application level. This is an interesting lesson for me. IDS and IPS systems. Hands up if you've ever heard about these. So what is an IDS and what is an IPS? Let's talk about what they are, the types of systems that we have. And of course, I know that IDS, IPS systems is a little bit too much because IDS means intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system. IDS systems is a little bit too much, I know. Forgive me for that. And we will also look at some examples of snort. So IDS versus IPS, what are we talking about? What's the purpose of each? Intrusion prevention systems are actually going to take action and they will want to prevent malicious traffic from entering the network, whereas IDSs are mainly used for detecting that malicious traffic, so they will not take action themselves. As you can see in the IPS systems, they're actually going to block or drop malicious traffic, whereas with the IDS, the biggest action that it will take is put out an alert. When it comes to placement, you usually place your IPS systems in line with your network traffic, meaning that it goes through your IPS systems. Because then if your IPS detects something, it can block it. Your IDS systems can either be inline or out of band. It doesn't matter there. But if you put your IPS system out of band, you will have problems. You cannot block your network traffic if you're just out of band. It might be too late. When it comes to performance, these may cause latency issues due to packet inspection. It might take a little bit longer, but there's a price for security when we talk about IPS systems. IDSs generally do not impact network performance because they will just analyze the traffic as it is coming through and not really stop it. As for configurability, it is more complex to configure an IPS system, and tuning it is required often. Depending on your own network traffic, you might have to tune it because it might be a little bit too aggressive in some parts and not aggressive enough in others. Whereas your IDS systems are easier configurations and they are also requiring some kind of tuning because everybody's network traffic will be slightly different. When it comes to cost, IPSs are typically more expensive than IPS systems, but it all depends, of course, because you can take a really high range IDS system and it might cost you more than a low range IPS system. It's all about the budget you have for it. Snort, on the other hand, is a widely used open source intrusion detection and prevention system. It's both. It's an IDS and an IPS in one. It's going to analyze network traffic and it's identifying potential security threats based on a set of predefined rules. Read that carefully. So these rules are set up beforehand and then Snort is going to try to detect and prevent potential issues from occurring. Now, what did we learn, class, about where do we put IPS systems? Since an IPS is included in Snort, you have to put it in line. It's highly customizable and can be used for a variety of purposes. If you only want to use the IDS, you don't have to put it in line. But if you want to use the combined functionality of IPS and IDS, you do have to. It can perform network monitoring, forensics, and compliance, and it has a large community of users and developers who are contributing to its ongoing development and improvement. Snort is a powerful tool for enhancing the security of a network and preventing cyber attacks. This is some of the Snort alerts which we might receive at the interface with a specific timestamp as well. With a source and a destination address with IP address and port we can see there, and a description: observed abused content delivery network. If you want to configure this on your own network, don't be surprised because Snort is going to detect a lot of, you might think, oh, is that really super dangerous? It depends. It depends, of course. But just give it a shot and you might see. Snort is open source, by the way, so it is freely installable. Here are some more Snort alerts that we can get. They each get given a GID and SID, that's a unique number, the protocol that it's on, TCP, UDP, the sources, the port, the destination port, and the messages. Oh, and one thing I keep forgetting, the action there that you see, that triangle with the exclamation mark, that means that no action has been taken yet. If there's an action that has been taken for that specific call, then it'll say, then it'll put a little check mark there. Let's talk about some of these custom rules, shall we? So one of the first ones we can see here is alert ICMP any to any message ping of def detected D size over 1000, I type 8, I code 0, detection filter track, etc. So this message is basically trying to detect your ping of def. Below that we have an ICMP flood that is trying to be detected. You can see some of the rules there at the very end, track by destination, count 50 seconds 10, etc. You also have your, this one is for potential TCP denial of service attacks. Then we also have another one for ping of def on SID 777777 if the package size is larger than 10,000. For ICMP, of course, you're not going to send ICMP packets that are 10K. And then you have your Nmap XMS3 attack detection as well. This is what Nmap looks like. You guys have probably seen it if you've watched some of my videos or any other ethical hacking video for that matter. You have your port scan, and as you guys know, that generates noise. So what happens is we see some suspicious inbound to MySQL on port, to Postgres on port. It is doing suspicious scanning there because it is doing a handshake. But why? Why is it doing that? That's what Snort is asking here. It is suspicious. What's going on? Unified Threat Management, or UTM, some of you might know it as. What does UTM do? What does the UTM stand for? We've seen that before, but what does it really stand for? What is that Unified Threat Management? We'll look at that, we'll understand the components, and we'll give you some examples. Unified Threat Management, or UTM, I'm going to call it from now on, is a comprehensive security solution, and it's going to combine multiple security features into a single device or service. UTM devices typically include things such as firewalls, antivirus, web application filtering, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, and VPN connectivity. UTMs are designed to provide a high level of protection against various types of threats and attacks, including malware, phishing, and hacking attempts. As you can imagine, these UTMs are a bit more expensive than your separate devices, but you have a all-in-one solution, and you have all of these devices in one system, so you don't have to buy them separately anymore either, which can also save you some costs. Some examples of this are Zyxel. They have DNS/URL threat filtering in their options, and you can log that. You can do DNS threat filtering or URL threat filtering, and you can pick if you want to what their policies are if something is detected. And then you also have your category list at the very bottom here. Here we see the IPsec VPN server in that same device. So we had our web filtering, DNS filtering. Now we include VPN services in that same device, and content filtering and even application patrol. We also include anti-malware in the same UTM, and sandboxing, which is a technique where you run something in what's known as a sandbox. That way, if something does happen, it only happens in that sandbox, and the policy for that sandbox is that the sandbox in this case gets destroyed after usage. This can be for example, zip files, executables, MS-DOC files, but any type of file type can run in that sandbox as long as we add it here. We also have IPS systems with detection and prevention, so that's not just IPS but also IDS. And remember, we have to put that in line with our network traffic if we want to use the IPS features. And here we can see also the WAN groups and LAN groups in the same device. We also have some more configurations for your VPNs. We can also set different policies here, and we can use, remember, on-premise configuration there, or we can use Nebula Cloud Authentication with two-factor authentication with captive portal if we want to. Now let's talk about some more advanced networking concepts. Let's talk about VPN technologies, network segmentation and isolation, and network security best practices. First of all, VPN. There are several VPN types, but IKE version 2 and OpenVPN are two commonly used protocols for their enhanced security features compared to traditional IPsec remote VPNs. That was also a protocol, but it is used less and less these days. Strong encryption algorithms. These include AES SHA-2 and elliptic curve cryptography. Say that 10 times fast, or I would prefer to say ECC. Let's go with that. They also support perfect forward secrecy, or PFS. This means that even if an attacker manages to obtain the encryption key, they cannot use it to decrypt past sessions. PKI. With certificate-based authentication. This adds an extra layer of security and authentication for VPN connections. Let's talk about IPsec for a moment. Just a quick introduction. IPsec consists of two phases: IKE, Internet Key Exchange, Phase 1 and Phase 2. IKE Phase 1 sets up secure channel for negotiating and exchanging encryption keys, authentication methods and other security parameters, while in IKE Phase 2, we establish a secure data tunnel using the encryption keys and security parameters negotiated in Phase 1. So Phase 1 will serve as the purpose for